The big white room was full of cameras and bright lights that made everything look too shiny. Sarah Martinez sat at the long wooden table with papers spread out in front of her. She was wearing her favorite blue suit, the one that made her feel strong and ready to fight for what she believed. Sarah was only 32 years old, but she had already made a name for herself. In Washington, D.C., people knew her as the woman who never backed down from a fight, especially when it came to helping immigrants and working families. She had come a long way from the small town in Texas where she grew up, Pocross. The room sat Senator Victor Castillo. He was much older than Sarah, maybe 55 or 60, with gray hair that was always perfectly combed. He wore expensive suits and had the kind of smile that politicians practice in the mirror. Victor had been in politics for over 20 years, and everyone knew his story about how his family escaped from Cuba when he was young. The hearing was about immigration laws, and both Sarah and Victor were there to talk about what America should do about the millions of people who wanted to come to the country for a better life. Sarah wanted to make it easier for people to become Americans. Victor wanted to make the rules much stricter. The room was packed with reporters who had their notebooks ready, cameras that would send everything live to television stations across the country. People at home were watching while they ate dinner or took breaks from work. Everyone knew that when Sarah Martinez and Victor Castillo were in the same room, sparks would fly. Chairman of the committee was an old man who looked tired. He banged his little wooden hammer and said the hearing could begin. Sarah was the first person to speak. She stood up and looked directly at the camera. Sarah began talking about families who had been separated at the border. She told stories about children who cried for their parents and mothers who worked 3 jobs just to send money back home to their families. She spoke with passion, and her voice got louder as she talked about the unfairness of the current system. When Sarah finished talking, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Victor Castillo asked to speak. He stood up slowly and looked around the room before he began to talk. Victor said that America was a nation of laws and that people who wanted to come here had to follow the rules. He talked about how his own family had come to America the right way and how they had worked hard to become successful. He said that making immigration too easy would be unfair to people who followed the rules. Sarah could feel her anger growing as Victor spoke. She thought about her own grandmother, who had cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years and never complained. She thought about families she had met who were afraid to go to the doctor because they might be sent away from the country. When Victor finished speaking, Sarah asked to respond. She stood up and her hands were shaking a little bit from anger. She looked directly at Victor and began to speak in a voice that was much louder than before. Sarah said that Victor was being a hypocrite. She said that his family had been lucky to escape from Cuba, but that other families deserved the same chance. She said that Victor had forgotten where he came from, and that he was now trying to keep other people from having the same opportunities his family had. Victor tried to interrupt, but Sarah kept talking. Her voice was getting louder and angrier, and everyone in the room could see that she was losing control of her emotions. The cameras were recording everything, and people watching at home were leaning forward in their chairs. Then Sarah said something that made everyone gasp. She pointed her finger at Victor and said that if he thought America was only for certain kinds of people, then maybe he should go back to Cuba where he came from. The words came out of her mouth before she could stop them. The room became completely silent. You could hear people breathing and the sound of cameras clicking. Everyone stared at Sarah, who suddenly realized what she had just said. Her face turned red and she looked down at her papers. Victor Castillo stood very still for a long moment. His face did not show any emotion, and nobody knew what he was thinking. The reporters were writing as fast as they could because they knew this was going to be big news. Everyone expected Victor to get angry. Everyone expected him to shout back at Sarah or to demand that she apologize. People had seen him get mad before when other politicians attacked him. He was known for his quick temper and sharp tongue, but Victor did not get angry. Instead, he asked the chairman if he could have the floor to speak. The chairman nodded, and everyone in the room leaned forward to hear what Victor would say. Victor walked to the front of the room where everyone could see him clearly. He looked at Sarah for a moment, and then he looked at the cameras. He took a deep breath and began to speak in a voice that was much quieter than usual. Victor said that Sarah had just said something very hurtful, but that he was not going to respond with anger. He said that her words had reminded him of something very important, something that he had never told anyone before, not even his closest friends or his wife. The room was so quiet that you could hear the air conditioning humming. Everyone was confused because This was not what they expected Victor to say. The reporter stopped writing and just stared at him. Victor said that he wanted to tell everyone the real story about his family and why they came to America. He said that the story everyone knew was not the whole truth and that it was time for him to be honest about what really happened. Sarah looked up from her papers and stared at Victor. She could see that something was different about him. His voice sounded different, and his eyes looked sad in a way she had never seen before. Victor began to tell a story that would change everything that everyone thought they knew about him. The cameras kept rolling, and people across America stopped what they were doing to listen to what he was about to say. Nobody in that room could have predicted what Victor Castillo was about to reveal and how it would change both his life and Sarah Martinez's life forever. The story he was about to tell would shock everyone who heard it and would make people question everything they thought they knew about immigration and family and what it really means to be American. Victor Castillo stood in front of the room and looked at all the cameras that were pointing at him. He could see his reflection in the big black lenses, and for a moment, he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. But Sarah Martinez's words had cut deep into his heart, and he knew it was time to tell the truth. Victor began to speak in a voice that was so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear him. He said that for 20 years, he had been telling people that his family escaped from Cuba because they were running away from the communist government. He said that this story had helped him win elections and gain support from voters who admired his family courage. But Victor said that this story was not completely true. His voice got even quieter as he admitted that his family did not leave Cuba for political reasons at all. The real reason was much more simple and much more painful. Victor told the room that his father, Miguel Castillo, was not a political prisoner or a wealthy businessman who lost everything to the government. Miguel was just a poor man who worked on a sugar plantation, cutting sugar cane under the hot Cuban sun from sunrise to sunset every day. Victor said that his father worked for 3 years, saving every single penny he could find. Miguel would eat only rice and beans so he could save money for his dream of coming to America. He did not want to escape communism. He just wanted to find a job that paid enough money to take care of his sick mother. The room was completely silent as Victor continued his story. He said that his grandmother, Maria, was very sick with a disease that made it hard for her to breathe. The doctors in Cuba said she needed medicine that was very expensive and hard to find. Miguel knew that if he could get to America and find a good job, he could send money back home to buy the medicine his mother needed. Victor's voice started to shake as he told the next part of the story. He said that his father finally saved enough money to buy passage on a small boat that would take him to Florida, but there was only enough money for one person to make the trip. Miguel had to choose between bringing his wife and young son or staying behind to take care of his sick mother. Miguel chose to leave his family behind and come to America alone. He promised his wife that he would work hard and save money to bring them to America later. He also promised that he would send money home every month to pay for his mother medicine. Victor wiped his eyes with his hand as he continued talking. He said that his father, Miguel, worked 3 jobs in Miami. He worked at a restaurant washing dishes in the morning. He worked at a construction site carrying heavy materials. In the afternoon and at night, he cleaned office buildings when everyone else had gone home. Miguel sent almost all of his money back to Cuba. It's through secret networks of people who would carry cash across the water. It was dangerous because if the Cuban government found out, they would put Miguel's family in prison, but Miguel kept sending money because his mother's life depended on it. Victor told the room that this went on for 10 long years. Miguel worked himself to exhaustion while his wife raised their son alone in Cuba. Miguel missed his son's first steps, his first words, and his first day of school. He saw his family only in old photographs that took months to reach him. During those 10 years, Miguel saved every penny he could to bring his family to America. He lived in a tiny apartment with 4 other men and ate only cheap food so he could save money for boat passage for his wife and son. He also kept sending money to pay for his mother medicine. Victor's voice broke as he told the room what happened next. He said that after 10 years of working and saving, Miguel finally had enough money to bring his family to America. Everything was arranged and his wife and son were supposed to leave Cuba in just 2 weeks. Before they were supposed to escape, Victor's grandmother Maria died in her sleep. She had been sick for so long that her body just could not fight any more. The medicine that Miguel had been paying for all those years was not enough to save her. Victor said that his father never forgave himself for not bringing his mother to America sooner. Miguel believed that if he had found a way to bring her with him when he first left Cuba, she might still be alive. He carried this guilt for the rest of his life. When Victor and his mother finally made it to America, they found Miguel to be a broken man. He'd worked so hard for so many years that his body was worn out and his heart was full of sadness. Never got over losing his mother, and he never stopped blaming himself for her death. Victor looked directly at Sarah Martinez as he continued his story. He said that his father, Miguel, died when Victor was only 16 years old. Miguel died still believing that he had failed his family because he could not save his mother. Victor said that after his father died, he decided to go into politics. He wanted to honor his father's memory by becoming successful in America, but somewhere along the way he had convinced himself that his family's story needed to be more dramatic to be politically useful. Victor admitted that he had been telling people that his family escaped from political persecution because it sounded more heroic than the truth. The truth was that his father was just a poor working man who wanted to take care of his sick mother and give his family a better life. Victor looked around the room at all the shocked faces staring back at him. He said that Sarah Martinez's angry words had reminded him that he had been dishonoring his father's memory by changing their story. His father had been brave enough to leave everything behind for love and family responsibility. That was more heroic than any political story. Victor said that he realized he had been wrong to support harsh immigration laws when his own father had been exactly the kind of economic immigrant that those laws were designed to keep out. Miguel had not been running from political persecution. He had been running toward opportunity and family responsibility. Room remained completely silent as Victor finished his story. He looked at Sarah Martinez and said that her words had been hurtful, but they had also been a gift because they forced him to remember who his father really was and what he had really was. Sacrificed for his family. Victor sat down and put his head in his hands. The cameras kept rolling and everyone in the room just stared at him in shock. Nobody had expected to hear such a personal and painful story. Sarah Martinez felt her anger melting away and being replaced by something she did not expect to feel toward Victor Castillo. She felt sorry for him. Within 1 hour of the hearing, ending the video of Sarah Martinez and Victor Castillo was everywhere on the internet. People were watching it on their phones while they waited in line at the grocery store. They were sharing it on social media and sending it to their friends and family members, but something strange was happening that nobody expected. Instead of focusing on Sarah's mean comment about Victor going back to Cuba, people were talking about Victor's emotional story about his father. Everyone wanted to know if what Victor said was really true news. Reporters from every major television station were scrambling to find out more information about Victor Castillo family. They called experts on Cuban history and immigration lawyers, and anyone who might know something about the Castillo family story. Sarah Martinez sat in her small office in Washington, D.C. watching the news coverage on her television. She could not believe what was happening. The reporters were not talking about her anymore. They were all focused on Victor and his revelation about his father. Sarah phone was ringing constantly. Her staff members kept coming into her office to tell her that more reporters wanted to interview her about what happened at the hearing, but Sarah did not know what to say. She felt confused and upset about everything that had happened. The news shows were playing Victor's story over and over again. People were calling in 2 radio stations to talk about their own family immigration stories. Some people said that Victor's story made them think differently about immigration. Others said they felt betrayed because Victor had lied about his family background for so many years. Sarah political advisors came to her office for an emergency meeting. They told her that she was in serious trouble because of what she said to Victor. They said that telling someone to go back to their country was considered racist, and that people were very angry about it. The advisors said that Sarah needed to apologize immediately and try to control the damage to her reputation. They showed her polls that said many people thought what she said was wrong and hurtful. They warned her that she might lose her job if she did not handle the situation properly, but Sarah was having trouble focusing on their advice. All she could think about was Victor's story about his father working 3 jobs and sending money back to Cuba, she kept thinking about how Victor's father had died, thinking he was a failure when really he had been a hero. Sarah turned on her computer to read what people were saying about the hearing on social media. She found thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories about family members who had immigrated to America. One woman wrote about her grandfather who came from Ireland and worked in coal mines for 30 years to support his family back home. A man shared a story about his mother who came from Vietnam and worked as a seamstress while going to school at night to become a nurse. Sarah realized that all of these stories were similar to Victor's father's story. They were all about people who left their home countries not because of politics, but because they wanted to work hard and take care of their families. Meanwhile, Victor Castillo was dealing with his own problems. The news reporters had started investigating his story, and they found records that proved everything he said was true. They found immigration documents showing that his father Miguel had indeed worked multiple jobs in Miami, but Victor's political supporters were not happy with him. Conservative voters who had supported him for years felt betrayed because he had not told them the truth about his family. They said that Victor had lied to get their votes and that they could not trust him anymore. Victor's office was flooded with angry phone calls from people who said they would never vote for him again. Some of his biggest financial supporters said they were going to stop giving money to his campaigns. His own political party leaders were discussing whether they should ask him to resign. Victor's wife Alina was watching the news at their home in Florida. She had never heard her husband talk about his father the way he did at the hearing. Alina knew that Victor still had nightmares sometimes about his father's death, but he had never talked about the guilt he felt. Alina called Victor at his office and told him that she was proud of him for finally telling the truth about his father. She said that Miguel would have been proud too because Victor had finally honored his memory properly, but Victor was not sure if telling the truth had been worth it. His political career was falling apart and he did not know if he would be able to recover from the damage. The newspapers were calling him a liar and a fraud, even though he had been trying to make things right. Victor looked out the window of his office and saw protesters gathering outside the building. Some of them were holding signs that said Victor was a traitor to conservative values. Others were holding signs that said they supported him for telling the truth. The whole situation was getting more complicated every day. Sarah Martinez was being attacked by people who said she was racist, while Victor Castillo was being attacked by people who said he was a liar. Both of them were watching their political careers fall apart. Sarah's political party leaders called her into a meeting and told her that she needed to make a choice. They said she could either apologize publicly and try to save her career, or she could continue to defend what she said and probably lose her job. Victor's political party leaders had a similar meeting with him. They told him that he had embarrassed the party by admitting that his family's story was not what he had claimed for years. They said that he needed to find a way to fix the situation, or they would have to distance themselves from him. Both Sarah and Victor went home that night feeling lost and confused. They had both spent years building their political careers, and now everything was falling apart because of one heated exchange at a congressional hearing. Sarah lay in bed thinking about Victor's story and wondering if she had been wrong about him all along. She realized that she had judged him based on the political story he told, instead of trying to understand the real person behind the story. Victor sat in his study looking at old photographs of his father Miguel. He wondered if he had dishonored his father memory by using a false version of their story for political gain. He also wondered if it was too late to make things right. Neither Sarah nor Victor could sleep that night because they both knew that their lives had changed forever. The media storm was just beginning, and they had no idea how much worse things were going to get before they got better. Next morning would bring even more surprises as people across America continued to react to what they had seen and heard at the congressional hearing. 3 weeks after the hearing, Sarah Martinez was sitting alone in a small coffee shop near the Capitol building. She was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap because she did not want people to recognize her. The media attention had been overwhelming, and she needed some time to think. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at the screen and was surprised to see that it was from Victor Castillo. The message was simple. It just said that he would like to talk to her privately if she was willing. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She was not sure if meeting with Victor was a good idea. Her political advisors had told her to stay away from him because any association with him might make her situation worse. But Sarah was curious about what Victor wanted to say to her. She also felt guilty about what she had said to him at the hearing. Even though she was still angry about his immigration policies, she realized that her comment about going back to Cuba was wrong. And hurtful Sarah texted back and agreed to meet with Victor at a small restaurant outside of Washington, D.C., where they would be less likely to be seen by reporters. They agreed to meet the next evening, when it would be dark, and fewer people would be around the next night. Sarah drove to the restaurant feeling nervous and unsure about what to expect. She arrived first and sat at a table in the back corner where she could see the door. Victor arrived 15 minutes later, looking tired and older than she remembered. Victor sat down across from Sarah, and for a moment neither of them knew what to say. They had been political enemies for so long that being in the same room together felt strange and uncomfortable. Finally, Victor spoke first. He told Sarah that he wanted to apologize for all the harsh things he had said about immigration over the years. He said that after telling the truth about his father, he realized that his political positions had been wrong. Victor explained that he had been so focused on proving that his family deserved to be in America that he had forgotten about all the other families, were just like his father families, who were working hard and making sacrifices to take care of the people they do. Loved Sarah was surprised by Victor's honesty. She had expected him to be angry with her for what she said at the hearing. Instead, he seemed genuinely sorry for his past actions and words. Sarah told Victor that she also wanted to apologize. She said that what she said about him going back to Cuba was wrong, and that she had let her anger control her words. She explained that she had grown up hearing stories about how immigrants were treated badly, and it made her very passionate about defending. Then Victor asked Sarah to tell him more about her family story. Sarah had never talked about her personal life with Victor before, but something about his openness made her want to share. Sarah told Victor about her grandmother Rosa, who had crossed the border from Mexico in 1965 when she was just 18 years old. Rosa was pregnant and scared, but she was determined to give her child a better life than what was possible in the small village where she grew up. Sarah said that Rosa worked as a cleaning lady in hotels for 40 years. She cleaned hundreds of rooms every week, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets and vacuuming carpets. Rosa never complained about the work, even though it was hard and the pay was low. Victor listened carefully. As Sarah continued her story, Sarah said that Rosa lived in constant fear of being sent back to Mexico. Even though she had been in America for decades, she never felt completely safe. She never learned to drive because she was afraid of being stopped by police. Sarah's voice got emotional as she talked about how Rosa had worked so hard to make sure her children could go to school and have opportunities she never had. Rosa saved money for years to help pay for Sarah's college education, even though Rosa herself could barely read or write. Victor was quiet as Sarah finished her story. He could see the pain in her eyes when she talked about her grandmother. Fear and sacrifice. He realized that Sarah's passion for immigrant rights came from a very personal place, just like his own political positions had come from his family's story. Victor told Sarah that he was beginning to understand why she had gotten so angry with him at the hearing. He said that his harsh words about immigration must have felt like attacks on her grandmother's memory and all the sacrifices Rosa had made. Sarah nodded and said that was exactly how she had felt. She explained that when politicians talked about immigrants as if they were criminals or lazy people, it made her think about her grandmother, who had worked harder than anyone Sarah had ever known. Victor and Sarah continued talking for over 2 hours. They shared more stories about their families and their childhood experiences. They discovered that despite their political differences, they had both been shaped by immigrant grandparents who had sacrificed everything for their families. As the evening went on, both Sarah and Victor began to realize that their political positions were not as different as they had thought. They both wanted to honor their family's sacrifices, and they both wanted America to be a place where hardworking people could build better lives. Victor suggested that maybe they could work together to create immigration policies that were both fair and practical. He said that his experience with harsh policies and Sarah's experience with understanding immigrant struggles could help them find solutions that both parties could support. Sarah was intrigued by Victor's idea, but she was also worried about what people would think if they started working together. She knew that her supporters would be angry if she partnered with someone who had supported strict immigration laws for so many years. Victor had the same concerns. about his own supporters, but he said that maybe it was time for both of them to stop worrying about politics and start focusing on doing what was right. They decided to meet again the following week to continue their conversation. Sarah suggested that they should start by researching what had worked in other countries and what policies had been successful in helping families. While also addressing security concerns, Victor agreed and said that he had contacts at universities who studied immigration policy who might be able to help them understand the complexities of the issue better. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Victor thanked Sarah for being willing to meet with him. He said that for the first time in weeks he felt hopeful that something good might come out of the disaster at the congressional hearing. Sarah said that she felt the same way. She realized that she had learned more about immigration policy in one evening of honest conversation with Victor than she had in months of arguing with other politicians who agreed with her. They shook hands before leaving the restaurant and agreed to keep their meetings secret until they had developed a plan that they both felt confident about. Neither Sarah nor Victor could have predicted that their political careers would be saved by working together. But as they drove home that night, both of them felt excited about the possibility of creating real change instead of just scoring political points. The next few weeks would test whether their unlikely partnership could survive the pressure from their own political parties and whether they could develop policies that would actually help the families they both cared about. 6 months after their first secret meeting, Sarah Martinez and Victor Castillo stood together on the steps of the Capitol building, holding a thick document that represented months of hard work and compromise. They were about to announce the Martinez Castillo Immigration Reform Act to the world. Sarah looked nervous as she adjusted the microphone in front of her. She knew that what they were about to do could end both of their political careers, but she also believed it was the right thing to do. Victor stood beside her, looking calm and determined. The crowd of reporters in front of them was huge. Everyone wanted to know what the two former enemies had been working on in secret for the past several months. Rumors had been spreading around Washington that Sarah and Victor were collaborating on something, but nobody knew exactly what it was. Sarah spoke first, explaining that she and Victor had spent months studying immigration policies that had worked in other countries. They had talked to experts and economists and families who had been affected by current immigration laws. Sarah said that their proposed law would create a path to legal status for people who had been living and working in America for many years without causing problems. It would also increase security at the borders and create a system for workers to come to America legally when there were jobs available. Victor took the microphone next and explained that their plan would help families stay together while also making sure that people who wanted to come to America had to follow rules and procedures. He said that the law honored both American values of fairness and the need for organized immigration. The reporters immediately started asking difficult questions. They wanted to know how Sarah could work with someone who had supported harsh immigration policies for years. They also wanted to know how Victor could support policies that his own political party opposed. Sarah answered by saying that she had learned that fighting about immigration without trying to understand different perspectives was not helping anyone. She said that working with Victor had taught her that people could disagree about methods while still caring about the same basic goals. Victor said that his father Miguel would have been proud to see him working to help other families who were making the same sacrifices that Miguel had made. He said that real leadership meant being willing to change your mind when you learned new information. The announcement was broadcast live on television, and within hours the reactions were pouring in from across the country. Sarah political party leaders were furious with her for working with Victor. They said she had betrayed progressive values by compromising with conservatives. Victor political party leaders were equally angry with him. They said he had abandoned conservative principles by supporting what they called amnesty for people who had broken immigration laws. But something unexpected started happening in towns and cities across America. Ordinary people began reading the details of the Martinez Castillo plan, and many of them liked what they saw. Town halls that had been scheduled to discuss other topics suddenly became discussions about immigration policy. People stood up to share their own family stories and to express support for politicians who were willing to work together. In Ohio, a grandmother named Margaret stood up at a town hall and told everyone about her Irish great-grandfather who had lied about his age to get into America in the 1800s. She said that if the country had had strict age verification back then, her family might never have made it to American Iowa. A farmer named Bill talked about the Mexican workers who had been helping with his harvest for over 20 years. He said that these workers were like family to him, and that he wished there was a legal way for them to stay in America, permanently similar. Stories were being shared in community meetings from Florida to Washington state. People were talking about the immigrants they knew personally and how those people had contributed to their communities. Meanwhile, newspaper editorials and television commentators were divided about the Martinez-Castillo plan. Some praised Sarah and Victor for their courage in working across party lines. Others criticized them for abandoning their core principles, but polls began showing that a majority of Americans supported the basic ideas in the plan. People were tired of politicians fighting about immigration without actually trying to solve problems. They wanted leaders who were willing to work together. Moderate politicians began expressing interest in supporting the Martinez-Castillo plan. A Republican senator from Arizona said that the plan made sense for border states. A Democratic congressman from California said that the plan could help reduce family separations. As support for the plan, Sarah and Victor found themselves in an unusual position. They were being criticized by their own political parties while gaining support from voters across the country. The political establishment in Washington was not happy about this development. Party leaders from both sides tried to pressure other politicians not to support the Martinez-Castillo plan. They warned that supporting the plan could hurt their chances of getting re-elected, but grassroots organizations began forming to support the plan. Immigrant rights groups and business organizations found themselves working together for the first time. Churches and labor unions started hosting joint events to build support for comprehensive immigration reform. Sarah and Victor traveled around the country, holding public meetings to explain their plan and listen to people's concerns. They were surprised by the positive reception they received in many places that they had expected to be hostile. Texas. Sarah met with ranchers who said they needed legal workers to help with their cattle and crops. In Florida, Victor met with Cuban American families who said they understood the difference between political refugees and economic immigrants. The momentum behind the Martinez-Castillo plan continued to build even as opposition from party leaders intensified. More politicians began publicly supporting the plan despite pressure from their own parties. After months of public debate and political maneuvering, Congress finally voted on the Martinez-Castillo Immigration Reform Act. The vote was closer than expected, but the plan passed with support from moderate politicians in both parties. President signed the bill into law 6 months later at a ceremony in the White House Rose Garden. Sarah and Victor stood behind the president as he signed their names into history. Both Sarah and Victor paid a price for their collaboration. Sarah lost her leadership position in her political party, and Victor faced a primary challenge from a more conservative candidate, but polls showed that both politicians had gained respect from voters across the country. People saw them as leaders who were willing to put the country interests ahead of their own political careers. A year after the law was signed, Sarah and Victor appeared together on a popular television talk show to discuss how their partnership had changed their lives. Sarah said that working with Victor had taught her that real change required building bridges with people who disagreed with her. She said that fighting felt good, but compromising actually got things done. Victor said that telling the truth about his father at that congressional hearing had been the most important moment of his political career. He said that it had forced him to choose between being honest and being popular, and that choosing honesty had set him free. The show hosts asked them what advice they would give to other politicians who wanted to work across party lines. Sarah and Victor looked at each other and smiled. Victor said that the first step was admitting when you were wrong and being willing to listen to people who had different experiences. Sarah added that real leadership meant caring more about solving problems than about winning arguments. Their unlikely partnership had not only changed immigration policy in America, but it also shown other politicians that it was possible to work together even after bitter disagreements. Sarah Martinez and Victor Castillo had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing politicians can do is tell the truth about their families and find common ground in their shared humanity.